Welcome. This is The Deep End. My name is Red Hawk. I'm coming to you from Spokane. I got a couple cohorts here. Bob Hayes out of Florida, and Mary Ann, she's down in Spokane Valley. We're in Washington State. Bob's over there in Florida. You know, it's been a long trek to human consciousness. And now we're faced with a whole new understanding, a whole new dilemma. And I want to start with a story, and I think the story, it's a story of the human bird, and I think it's a Hindu story. To be honest, I can't remember. But it's about the story of this bird that flies almost into space, right at the edge of the atmosphere, and lays an egg. And the egg falls, and as it falls, what's inside gestates, and it keeps forming just like any bird. And right before it hits and breaks, the egg cracks open, and a bird comes out and flies. That close. You see, that's the story of who we are right now. And I will tell you right now that my study this week and this podcast is probably one of the most unsettling of the 245 podcasts that we have done. Because there's a couple questions that are each so related to each other. The first is, will the human family survive our own self-destruction? And the second one is even a little bigger based on our understanding and our concept of metaphysics that we've tried to develop through being and life all the way to self-consciousness. Is consciousness itself a dead-end loop? You see, what we've learned through pastoral counseling and through psychology is that consciousness loves chaos. It loves this emotional thing that happens in chaos. And we seem to each have a circuit in us that creates this for ourselves. There seems to be this self-destruct sequence or aspect of self-awareness that is now being enacted at a global level. And it's been acted on a global level before. Freud has talked about thanatos as well as eros. That's the seeking, not like an eros, which is life wanting more of itself. Thanatos is life seeking death. I went into so many different studies this week. Stanford, by 2080, a study out of Stanford said there are 3 possibilities for the human family: extinction, the collapse of civilization, or we thrive. But there can be no thriving without a biosphere that is integrable. Hawkings, Stephen Hawkings, he participates in what I call the fear of being enslaved by our creations. And he talks about AI, basically that and a crowded planet. You know, what happens if our artificial intelligence becomes more competent than we are and we become a blip on its screen? Now, of course, this gets back to Terminator stuff, doesn't it? But Terminator is based on some real stuff. There might not be a place for human beings. And is this AI the outcome, the next piece? We've talked about being, we've talked about becoming life and life becoming conscious and conscious becoming self-aware. Is the next piece somewhere out there? And the UN, in a number of studies, has said the planet right now is on a path to self-destruction. 70 years after the world atrocities of World War II, those people are dying off and we're forgetting. So the question is this destructive piece inherent? Climate change, disease, armed conflict, population, and some think technology? Is it friend or foe? And the problems are accelerating. So I'm a realist. I know we have some good intellectual thinkers out there, but I'm a realist. We have to say this does not look good. So what do we do next? How do we respond? How do we own this? And I think that's the piece I want us to get now, is I want us to see that we are on the precipice. an existential precipice, and it is not a friendly thought. As a matter of fact, there's a whole lot of forces trying to keep us from seeing this. Watts, who was the Secretary of Interior under Reagan, I believe, said the whole purpose of the planet is to use it up, and then God will take care of the rest. I cannot subscribe to that. We seem to be on this precipice. We are creators of chaos, and we are just as creative in creating chaos as we are in creating other things. So how do we own this? And, Bob, Marianne, I'm going to turn it to Bob first, but will we make it?
Oh, it's a big question, isn't it? When you think about it, as long as there's been human civilization, there's been the feeling that we were on that precipice. I mean, the early Christians, they really believed that they were the last generation, that Jesus was going to return, and that was the end of it all. And each succeeding generation has had its own thoughts about the end times. And there's still people today who think we're in the end times, and they can, quote Bible verses and so forth to support their beliefs. When I was in graduate school, my master's thesis was on the environmental crisis and whether or not it was the end of evolution. Because evolution is not a friendly process. Evolution destroys more species than it allows to evolve. And the question becomes, what is going to happen? Are we going to evolve to the next phase, or are we going to go the way that most species have gone throughout the history of the planet? And as we've talked about in many different editions of the podcast, it's really up to us, because we're consciously aware of the position we're in, and we have to make decisions now that are going to let us move forward. And then it gets down to the numbers game. We've talked about that before too.
Yeah.
One person can't save the planet. A majority of people have to pull together to save the planet, and that's the main question.
Yeah. So, Marianne, how do we share this question? Will we make it? How do we get folks to engage it in a realistic way?
Well, I think one of, for me, when I think about will we make it as a species, I always go back to the individual and the individual responsibility that each one of us has. And we can no longer go, there's a line from a movie that says, everything will be okay. And everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, then it's not the end. Well, that's, to me, kind of, that's wishful thinking. And I think that we're not guaranteed that we're going to survive. And I think becoming aware that we have a hand in our evolution, as you were talking about, Bob, we have a hand in where the planet will go. The planet doesn't need us, but we need the planet. And so to recognize that we're part of the whole ecosystem, that shift has got to happen. The quote that you said earlier, Red Hawk, about let's use up the planet and let God take care of the rest. That is appalling, because that doesn't recognize that we are using ourselves up. We are using up our, we're destroying ourselves.
Yeah.
So this is a huge, huge question. And I tend to be an optimist with a pessimistic, realistic viewpoint. But in order for me to continue to want to improve my consciousness and improve the world around me and the people that I encounter, I have to hold in my thoughts and in my heart that, yes, we can turn this around. We are on the edge. I totally believe that. But like you said, Bob, throughout history, we've been on the edge, except now we have nuclear bombs.
Yeah, and I'm gonna argue with that. I don't give a damn about all that belief crap. Because the fact is, we now know existentially we are on the edge. It's not about belief.
Yep.
It's not about us versus them, because there ain't no us versus them. As a matter of fact, us versus them is creating the very existential threats that we're talking about. So a couple things. We are in the middle of what scientists are calling the sixth great extinction. There's been a number of those. We're part of this one. We are also at a place where the apocalyptic is not some fancy belief system. We now have, for those, Bob, you and I have been reading sci-fi. There's enough dystopian pictures right now of possibilities that we have to somehow bring this. And this is what I'm going to try to bring. The real is now becoming clear. And in this country, you can see a huge backwash against the real, because the real indicts the human family. Now, part of what's got to happen to me, and this is very Jungian as well as Fritz Perls, we have to own this aspect of ourselves. We can't deny it. We have to see it in a new reality. We need more metaphors. We need more stories that transport the individual inside this reality. So they know that, we're not on the battlefield huddling to keep out of the fray of shrapnel, but we are on a battlefield to keep out of the fray of consequences that will destroy our grandchildren. And I think it's important for us to grasp that. At the same, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but each one of us has a part to play in this. I think, what you're saying, Red Hawk, is that, at least what I'm hearing you say, is that we all are responsible for this, and we all have to recognize it and not shy away from it and not go la la land and diversion, because we're great at diversions.
And, also, what did Jesus say? You all can see, the dark cloud coming and the rain and stuff, but you can't see the stuff that's going on around you. We are headed towards a third global conflict. It'll have huge consequences on our children and grandchildren. If you can't see that, if you can't see the divisiveness in this country, if you can't diagnose it, you can no way have a proper prognosis. And that's where we are. That's what this show is about today, is about what the diagnosis is real. I refuse to see the human family as a cancer on the planet or a virus or something. I do not. I believe the planet is breeding us as co-creators in this great diversity. Now, why do I believe that? Because the evidence is in that there's more compassion and passion in the name of this community than there is destructive quality. We just don't have the stories to speak it yet. But we need to somehow speak this shit, man. I'm telling you, the fact is, the very shit that we're going to drown in, there's a lot of energy and power in it if we spread it thin enough and know where to put it. I'm ranting.
And you make a good point. You make a good point about needing new stories, because I'll get back and to the phrase I used earlier, the numbers game. The three of us are talking, and we talk each week, and we basically agree with each other. There's some differences here and there, but
you guys are wrong
we don't
sometimes.
Have to convince each other. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I had to say that.
That's okay. The people we have to convince are the deniers, the people who don't believe that COVID actually happened, the people who don't believe that there is a shortage of anything, that it's just a conspiracy that's just trying to hold them down. And somehow we have to break through to those people, because if we don't have a majority of thinking people moving toward making a more sustainable world, then it's not going to work. It doesn't matter how many of us march and how many of us, write articles and how many of us have discussions like this, unless we can get through to them. And that's where my pessimism rears its ugly head. And I try to be an optimist, but I don't see how you break through to people who have built such strong walls against thinking rationally.
Yeah. And it goes back to that first story I told. I pray that the damn bird, cracks out of its egg and grows some wings, some feathers in time to not smash against the earth. Go ahead, Marianne. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
Well, no, that's okay. Well, and that goes.
Oh dear.
Back to that, but I think you mentioned COVID, and it's still happening, and people are not recognizing that these viruses are going to be with us now, and not only are we do we have the capability of blowing up the planet, but these viruses are attacking us, and we are not uniting in order to survive as a species. And I think that's something, and for me, as you were talking, I was thinking of the power, the people in power, and how I think what the human race is examining and is grappling with is, who do we assign power to, and how much are we going to be led by the nose by that, right? And I think it all comes back to each one of us recognizing that people in power are there because we put them there, and that we have to take back our own power and make sure that we have people representing us who align with what we want, and we don't have that right now. So I think there's this huge waking up on our own personal power and how to use it, and in order to save our grandchildren.
I don't know if you saw Matthew McConaughey's speech from the White House about the killings in Uvalde, Texas, and how emotional he was. And I was so moved by it.
Well, let's just hope, Bob, you froze up. You guys are freezing up on me. Let's just hope that he has a hope down there in Texas. Texas is being run by 20% of the people right now.
But at the end, I said, well, wait a minute. He didn't call out that 20%, or he didn't call out the 80% to do something.
Oh, we got some freezing up here.
Well, and so it's interesting that you. Okay.
Keep going, Marianne.
Okay, so that speech was powerful, and it touched people in their hearts. He really communicated some emotion there. And I made the mistake of reading comments underneath of that. And people were saying, oh, this guy's just an actor.
Yeah.
Totally dismiss them. That's what we have to get away from.
And here's the thing. I mean, both of you all said it, and I'm going to cut in because you guys are freezing up all over the place. We need to find a way to speak the truth in a tight end run without people knowing. We need to sneak it in. But what we need to sneak in is nothing that is the light. It is the dark itself. And this is the piece. I mean, I see so many people, everything happens for a reason. Everything is wonderful, love and light. Oh, the planets are aligned. That's all very good and nice, but right now is a time to own the dark. What did William Blake said when he was in the marriage of heaven and hell? He was offered to go to heaven, and he says, no, I want to go to hell because energy is eternal delight. We need to go into that space and know that it is us. And that is a huge, huge step. and I'm not sure the human family is capable of it. And yet, I think we will be after the third world conflict. Because what will happen is the atrocities will be brought home again. And that is not a very optimistic point of view, although I hope the outcome is an optimistic one.
Well, yeah, and I think too that, as you were talking about that, that we have to look at this. It's, the idea of the dark night of the soul popped into my mind, and that whole concept. And we go through that on individual levels. And what's happening now, it's a planetary dark night. And so, I mean, these are the dark ages, right? And we have to go into that, like you said, and not deny it and get through it.
And it's chaos. And Bob and I have been having the conversation of chaos and order is the new duality. We are so creative in creating these chaoses. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, we keep saying we, and I'm not sure who we are. I mean, I would like to say we are a planetary species, but we're not. I think we have to change them because, again, we recognize the problem. The three of us and probably most of the people listening to this show, but they don't. And this is where we need to go back to Hermes and the whole idea of the trickster. We were a little earlier, Red Hawk. We have to slip past their defenses and trick them into changing the way they think. And that's what disappointed me about Matthew McConaughey. He didn't talk about them. He didn't talk about the people who were not willing to make schools safer, not willing for background checks. He kept saying we have to find common ground. We don't have to find common ground. We have to convince them to move off of their denial into reality.
Well, and I think that consciousness is divided, but it is still one. And I don't think in terms of us and them. I think in terms of aspects of who we are. And Texas is very splintered right now. And what politics is trying to do is a kind of a last-ditch effort. But I don't think it's helpful to see in terms of us and them. And I do believe there's common ground, but that's part of what they cannot see, that the very air they breathe, the very safety of the schools they send their children to, that is common ground. The clean water is common ground. Having good energy at an affordable price is common ground. I don't know if you notice the energy prices in Texas, but there's a lot of old people who are going to die this summer because the energy prices are so high. Because of what they've done to the grid, and that people are not going to turn on their AC, and that's Texas. So, again, over and over, we are one family. We might be dysfunctional. We might be divided. In my mind, at least, there is no us and them, ultimately, at least within the metaphysic. Now, there's us and them on political issues and stuff, but at the level I really believe we need to address is waking people up to what the common ground is. And I think we've done a poor job of that, and I think that's another piece that has to happen. I'm looking forward to the next, what's it called, Avatar, to see what they do with this piece, because they're going to deal with it. So I differ with you a little bit on that, Bob. Go ahead, Marianne.
Yeah, I kind of, I'm kind of on the fence there with the us and them too, because they are us. In some ways, they're talk about a shadow aspect, but then on the other hand, I am disillusioned because if we can't find common ground on children being massacred while they're at school, what will we find common ground on? The fact that after Sandy Hook, we didn't have major changes in this country is very disheartening. And there's a part of me that thinks that we're incapable of of going forward. And I heard something a little bit different in Matthew McConaughey's speech about the NRA and the gun owners. And he was saying that most of us are for these things. Most of us, we're being hijacked by a small faction of people. And I think that's another part of going back to that personal responsibility. And we can no longer sit on the sidelines. It's going to take everybody doing their part in order to change the whole.
Amen. Boy, no kidding. And, you know, when you bring up gun violence and you talk about it in the context of chaos, and Bob, I'll be honest, some of the stuff you sent me on chaos has been just enlightening as hell. We are chaos gone wild. It's a perfect ethos to track from how the NRA, and I was brought up NRA. That's how I learned to shoot. My dad would take me to Fort Myer, and the NRA had classes and stuff, and it was awesome. This piece of chaos that seems to, I mean, if you listen to Fox News, they are literally trying to create chaos. They are trying to create a chaos that can be used to divide. And that's part, you know, and I'll be honest, this whole thing of thinking of us as divided, I fall into it all the time because this is the darkness I need to own in me. I'm a pissed off motherfucker, okay? I got to hit the explicit button for this podcast. And I'm pissed off. Actually, I'm beyond pissed off. I'm hostile. I literally am hostile. And the reason I'm hostile is because this chaos creators love to divide. And I'll be honest, and I'm on the side of the divide Bob's on, and I don't want to minimize the divide because there is an us and them in there. But if we go a little deeper, we see that it's what Jung said, it's a single self divided among itself. and that over and over, you know, I think of the Chinese. You know, we're going to see, I'm hoping I'll live long enough to see the world conflict. So the last thing I can say is, so long, suckers. You know, the world is moving into chaos. Go ahead, Mary. I'm just babbling at this point.
I think individually, there are a lot of people leaving the planet right now saying, so long, suckers. I've had enough. And I think, you know, it's there's no way to know what's coming, what's going to happen. And I hope that we can pull back from this major conflict, but it does not look promising. And because there are people that are extremely invested in, like you said, in having this division and creating it, because it keeps them, again, I go back to, it keeps them in power. It keeps them insulated. It keeps them in whatever it is that they don't have to worry about what's coming next because they're taking care of themselves.
Yeah. And we're at the end of our time. I don't mean to cut you off, but I do try to keep these podcasts. So, Marianne, on that note, you want to give us a final comment?
You know, I think it can be easy to sink into despair in times like these. And I think it's important that we resist that, because despair is going to create inaction on our part, and we're going to give up and say there's nothing we can do. Well, I still think we do have personal power. I still think that even if each one of us in our own personal lives, in our own way, can just keep encouraging others, I think that is going to help. And then we will have to come together on a collective level and make the changes we want to see. And it's going to take courage. It's going to take a lot of courage.
Amen. Bob?
Well, again, evolution works by putting tension, putting danger on us that we have to overcome. It's the only way it works. And you mentioned, Red Hawk mentioned that maybe some people are going to be dying in the heat in Texas. Well, a bunch of people died in the cold in Texas, and it didn't seem to do anything. So, again, it's the same battle we are constantly fighting. We have to get the species to wake up to the fact that we're in danger. And if it doesn't wake up to that, then we're going to go the way of all evolution. We're going to become extinct. So I am optimistic because astronomers have found another planet that looks very much like Earth. Maybe they'll do a better job than we did.
Amen. That's great. And that's actually Stephen Hawking's hope. He says we got to get out of this place, and we need to find some other places to spread out. And you all have said something very important. We need to learn to think as a species. As a species. You see, evolution's main tool is the mistake. I think, and what's happened is the mistakes have built up their compounding. And if you look at wave theory, you see that there's a point where the wave builds up so much that it breaks. And I think it's going to have a breaking point. And I think that breaking point is going to bring about great change. And some of us have already begun making that change and opening ourselves to new ways of thinking and new ways of understanding. And even when we don't have a tool or a way of understanding, we know that the understandings we have won't fit the world we live in. And we need to find new ways. So where are we going next? A new context of meaning is quickly approaching. Some have already adopted it, and it's going to create huge change. Hopefully, it won't be wrenching change like conflict. Change. We hope you'll join us, and until then, we hope that you find a moment to touch the oneness and let it touch you. In the name of this blessing.